Good morning, Year 12. We are talking stories we tell. More specifically, I am going to talk to you about the theme of memory and meaning. So this is just one in a series of screencasts that you will see from the 3 Year 12 English teachers about the themes in stories we tell. I'm also going to offer you a little bit of an essay plan throughout it. Alright, so memory and meaning with regards to stories we tell. So we've looked at this little snippet here that you can see on your screen now. It says that Polly sets out to discover the mother who died when she was young, but learns about Harry Golkin, who turns out to be her biological father. So the way I've gone about this is I've kind of picked 3 key quotes and then I've unpacked them and found more examples. And as I said, I've also got an essay for you, or at least an essay question with a bit of a plan, so that you can understand how memory and meaning might be helpful when it comes to writing on stories we tell, something you've already started to do. So memory and meaning is one of the film's central focuses. I've said again and again in class that this film doesn't have one specific focus. It has varying and sometimes contradictory focuses. But this is, memory and meaning is one of those. So in a conversation with Johnny, her brother, Sarah says, it's about a lot of things. And Johnny responds after he's asked her what the film's about. Memory, he said. And Sarah responds by saying memory and the way we tell the stories of our lives. And I really love this quote when it comes to memory, because I think it is one of the really big focuses for me, and one of the things that strike me about stories we tell is that for Sarah Polly, it is about her family and the way they've chosen to tell the story of their lives. In this case, the way she, as a director, and I'm really going to emphasize her role as a director in this screencast, has chosen to tell the story of her mother, I suppose, and her desire to understand the mother that she lost at a young age. So the essay question I'm going to use to frame a lot of our discussion is this one. So I've pulled this from the VAT study guide. So we've looked at a couple of different VAT questions now. We'll start to look at exam questions when it comes to the specific SAC prep. More, and by exam questions I mean more of those exam style questions. But I just thought this one was really good because it helps us to really hone our thinking. So it is because Michael, Sarah and Harry all have different approaches to remembering Diane that the viewer is better able to understand her character. So it's a slightly different twist on that discussion we had in class about the different sides of Diane Polly. So let's start by unpacking the title, Stories We Tell, and that noise you can hear in the background is Dozer, who's cranky because he's been barked. Alright, so Stories We Tell, the title and how it relates to memory. The title of the film itself was quite significant, and I think I initially overlooked the title of this film, but then I was reading about it and I realised that it's actually quite clever because it's about, this film itself is in many ways, and I think Polly says this either in an interview or throughout the film, the stories that we tell ourselves to make sense of our lives. And I like that. I like the fact that she's used the name of this film to alert us to the fact that we do make sense of our lives in a very specific way. So I think the title of the film is one distinct pointer that one of the general focuses is about the fact that she's setting out to look at the memories of her mother, and through each of those individual memories she's trying to give meaning to her mother's life. By having all these interviews and by pulling them together, she is hoping to construct the different meaning around who her mother was. And of course, we've got to note that Polly and the family are only left with memories, all right, and the way they choose to give meaning to those memories, because of the fact that it is very hard to do this in the wake of Diane no longer being around to tell her story. I talked before about the plural, stories is significant, the montage of interviewees, and the fact that there's no central story in the film. There's no one view of Diane that's being presented. It is very much a mishmash. There is a lot going on all at the same time. So the first key quote isn't actually from the film. As I said before, it's actually from an interview that Polly did, all right? And the interviewer talked about like what Polly was trying to do, and she said, I was interested in the way we depend on narratives to make sense of our lives, so that stories aren't just something we tell young children. You know, we don't just say bedtime stories, but we need stories to make sense of our lives. And I think it ties in with that Margaret Atwood quote about how a story isn't a story at all until you're looking back upon it. So the fact that Polly is using this to make sense of her mother, I think. So I started thinking about this in terms of the start and the end of the film, all right? So I've given you an example here through quotes of the start and end. So initially in those interviews with the family, it said, my memory of mum is someone who was very loud, all right? So Mark is saying that I suppose that his way of understanding his mother and who she was is very much focused on this retrospective sort of image, all right, and how he now imagines her, all right. And I think it's interesting because we talked in class, or at least my class did, about how this, you know, memory of someone who was very loud is very positive and very fun, whereas Mort describes Diane as someone who was always in disarray, all right, which is also really interesting because they contradict each other in some ways. And then I wanted to look at the end of the film, all right, and I thought that Michael was very interesting towards the end of the film when he says to Sarah, your editing of this will turn it into something completely different. So we depend on narratives to make sense of our lives, but we also write those narratives. We might have all been in the same place at the same time, but we have different memories, so to speak. The way we remember things isn't unanimous, so to speak. We all have a different interpretation, okay? I think importantly, it is about recapturing an image of her mother, all right, because she has missed out a lot on who Diane Polly was. So Sarah actually says that one of the things she's trying to do is trying to bring someone to life through people's stories of them. So as each of the storytellers speak, we get the sense that for Sarah, her mother really is coming alive, okay? And this is also again in becoming rather meta or breaking the fourth wall with Johnny when Johnny turns around and says, what's this film really about? And she says it is really about trying to bring someone to life, and that she's trying to bring her mother to life through other people's stories. However, in doing so, in trying to bring someone to life, I think Sarah also acknowledges that she has taken on a difficult task and something that can get, and I'm going to steal Harry's phrase here, quite woolly at times. And she says in an email between Michael, her father, and herself, have I completely lost my mind trying to reconstruct the past from other people's words? And you could argue that yes, she has, or you could argue no, she hasn't. I'm going to go for no, she hasn't, because I think Polly consciously acknowledges what she's trying to do, that she is looking at other people's words, okay? And that obviously the different narratives do have different voices, so they're going to be a little bit different or distinct, so to speak. And when I was trying to break this down further about why she would want to do this, I think again it comes to this desire to understand more of her mother, you know. She, in some of the more soft or candid moments, we see Sarah ask, did anyone know she was going to die? And I couldn't find this part in the book or in the script or in the film. But I think it was Mark or Johnny, and they say, no, you didn't know. So it was like, again, Sarah, because she was so young, missed out on a lot of this. So the others all knew what was happening at the time, but Sarah didn't. And so, again, she's trying to reconstruct this memory that the others had of her mother, and trying to make her own memory or her own understanding. She's trying to put her together, but then she does acknowledge when she's sort of giving the voiceover in the form of an email back to Michael that it's something like a tsunami, and I think we used the phrase tsunami in class, which I really liked, that it does overwhelm us, and at times it seems that Diane is slipping away. All right. The chorus of voices in the film. We've talked about this quite a lot. I think it's really interesting that this chorus of voices, or the cacophony of voices, or the medley of voices, whichever phrase you'd like to use, comes up again and again in different questions and in different themes. And I'm thinking that Miss Brooks and Miss Handel in their screencasts are likely to mention the chorus of voices as well, because I think it's almost one of those guaranteed things that if you're writing on stories we tell, you're going to have to be able to write on the cacophony or the medley of voices. So it is an interrogation process. I mean, this is tongue in cheek, in terms of Sarah talking to Michael when they're in the studio, and he says, "What's this all about?" She says, "An interrogation process." But again, she's interrogating a variety of different people, a variety of different voices. So the phrase we might use for that is multi-tiered narrative, all right? The best way is to have this multi-tiered narrative, to have this cacophony, to look at the variety of voices. So to interrogate the memory of her mother, to interrogate the memory of Diane, you have to have a variety of voices. Polly, through the use of multiple storytellers, forces audiences to question the relationship between our memories of the past and present. All right, very interesting that Polly, again, is being self-referential. She wants us to look at the fact that this isn't necessarily clear-cut or straightforward, or that it doesn't always make sense. All right, and then I think the evidence we have of the fact that we question this relationship is through the repetitive nature of the film, which I've suggested is an iteration of how it feels to remember. So memory is like a loop-like process. And I was thinking about how I could explain this to you guys, and I was thinking it's after something happens, it's after an event happens, it's after you all go out with your friends or your family, and the next day you all sit there and tell the story of the night before, or the day before, or the week before, and the way you all remember it is really different. But you all have your own memories of that, and none of those memories are any less true. And I think that's one of the points that Sarah Polly tries to make, is that the same story can be told from different perspectives, alright, so from different storytellers. In her case too, she uses different formats, different narratives, the Super 8, the newspapers, etc. Alright, it's because Michael and Sarah and Harry all have different approaches to remembering Diane that the viewer is better able to understand her character. So what I've put on the screen here is an introduction to the question. Now, being my own critic, I don't like the fact that you can see in pink in 3 spots that I have put quotes into this, okay? Which I dislike that. I wish the quotes weren't in there. That's just me being antsy. I don't like quotes in the introduction. However, again and again, I seem to be doing this. So this is maybe something we need to have a chat about in class. It's something I'll chat about with the other teachers, okay? And I've tried to take the different points that we've discussed on the previous slides and make them into the introduction here. On the slide you can now see in front of you, I've tried to give you just my idea of 3 paragraphs. Again, this is just my idea. By no means is it distinct, or distinct is probably the wrong word. By no means do you have to go with this. Come up with your own paragraphs, use one and not the others, etc. But if I was going to answer the question, it is because Michael, Sarah and Harry all have different approaches to remembering Diane, that the viewer is better able to understand her character. This is what I'd do. I would acknowledge that for Polly the film is about recapturing an image of her mother. I think you have to acknowledge this. I think to ignore this fact is a bit obscene, because it's clearly a big part of what the film is about, okay? I think you have to talk about that. I said before that I think you're going to have to talk again and again about the chorus of voices. The different voices mean that we have different offers of the truth or different memories being exposed. All right, so those two I would say are pretty clear cut. Sorry, I was using my fingers there, not my mouse. That's not going to be any help for you guys. So an image of her mother, cacophony of voices. I think that's pretty okay for 1 and 2. You might question what you want to do for paragraph 3. I certainly sat here and pondered it before I put it here. I've said that with the absence of the person at the heart of story, Diane, it becomes about Sarah. So this is something maybe a bit more controversial, but I'd say that ultimately if we were going to talk about one memory being privileged or one person understanding Diane, ultimately it is Sarah that is better able to understand Diane, because it's her who makes the choices as the director and her who constructs the narrative, I suppose. So that's how it all comes together. All right, I hope that makes sense. I hope I've kept it short, sharp, and brief. These slides will be accessible to you via the Google Classroom, okay? If you have any questions about any of this, come and see one of the English teachers, all right? Or shoot us an email. Thanks for listening.